There are decisions that fracture a life in 30 seconds. For Garrett Hayes, it was the moment he stepped between a stranger and her harasser, unaware that the woman was Victoria Sterling billionaire CEO, or that his instinct to protect would paint a target on his daughter's back. He certainly didn't know that Sterling Tory, as she'd later insist he call her, would become the second chance he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. The morning rush at Riverside Café carried its usual chaos. Garrett stood 3 people back in line, hand resting on Sophie's shoulder, while she clutched Mr. Bear and debated the merits of hot chocolate versus apple juice. 42 years old, and he still moved with the efficiency of his Ranger days, hyper-aware of exits and crowd density even in a coffee shop. Old habits didn't die. They just found new contexts. The woman ahead wore a charcoal suit that whispered money in every seam, dark hair pulled back with surgical precision, posture that spoke of boardrooms and balance sheets. She ordered something complicated involving almond milk and sugar-free vanilla, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. The man behind her closed the gap. "You should smile more. Women are prettier when they smile." The woman, Tori, though Garrett didn't know that yet, went still. Not the stillness of submission, the stillness of a predator deciding whether prey was worth the energy. She turned her head just enough to deliver frost. "Not interested." "Hey, I'm talking to you. It's just a compliment. Don't be such a 3 steps." That's all it took for Garrett to position himself between them, one hand still on Sophie's shoulder, the other loose at his side. His voice came out quiet, certain. "Back up." Preston Wade, though Garrett wouldn't learn the name until later, spun with manufactured outrage ready on his tongue. Then he saw Garrett's face. Whatever he read there made him recalculate. The expensive suit, the entitled stance, all of it folded inward as Preston's eyes tracked the way Garrett stood, the controlled stillness that separated men who'd seen real violence from those who only cosplayed at dominance. Preston's jaw worked. "You're making a mistake." "No, you are. Now you're going to step back, get your coffee somewhere else, and think carefully about whether you want this to be a problem." Phones were already out. The modern panopticon captured everything. Preston looked around, saw his humiliation being documented for posterity, and threw out a parting shot wrapped in venom. "You just fucked with the wrong guy." The door slammed behind him. The cafe released its collective breath. Garrett stepped back into his place in line like nothing had happened. Sophie tugged his hand. "Daddy, who was that mean man?" "Nobody, sweetheart. What did you decide, hot chocolate or juice?" Behind him, Tori Sterling studied Garrett with the kind of attention she usually reserved for quarterly reports and hostile takeover attempts. When the barista handed her the complicated latte, she lingered, waited for Garrett to order black coffee, hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and paid for both before he could object. "You didn't need to do that." Her smile carried a warmth that didn't match the Ice Queen exterior. "Consider it a thank you." "No thanks necessary." "I disagree." She left her card on the counter beside his coffee. Heavy stock, embossed, Victoria Sterling CEO, Sterling Enterprises. The kind of card that opened doors Garrett had spent 3 years avoiding. He threw it into the trash on his way out. Sophie chattered the whole drive to Little Learner's preschool, narrating Mr. Bear's opinions on traffic lights and proper hot chocolate temperature. Garrett made appropriate sounds of acknowledgement while his mind cataloged the morning's variables. The man's face, the barely contained rage, the threat that hadn't been empty bravado. 3 years of carefully controlled existence. Wake at 5:30, Sophie to school by 8, construction site until 3:45. Pick up Sophie at 4. Dinner, bath, bedtime stories, lights out by 8. Rinse and repeat until the grief became manageable background noise instead of a knife through the sternum. He'd built this life from the wreckage of Rachel's death the way he'd once approached tactical problems. Identify the objective. Eliminate variables. Execute with precision. The objective was simple: keep Sophie safe, happy, and unaware of how close her father walked to falling apart on any given Tuesday. The memorial photos on his living room wall told a story in 3 frames. Sophie at 2 gap-toothed and covered in birthday cake. His wedding day when he and Rachel were young enough to believe love was bulletproof. The last family photo taken 6 months before cancer turned Rachel's vibrant smile into something brave and brittle. He didn't look at that 3rd frame much anymore. The construction site hummed with purposeful chaos when Garrett arrived. Hayes and Sons Construction ran a tight operation, ironic given that Garrett was neither Hayes nor anyone's son, just a carpenter who'd proven reliable enough to make crew lead. The project was a commercial renovation in one of Denver's gentrifying neighborhoods, the kind of work that paid decent but required attention to detail. Wyatt Nash found him during the lunch break, 2 bottles of water in hand and concern written across his weathered face. Ex-Navy SEAL, 20 years Garrett's senior, and the closest thing to a father figure Garrett had allowed himself since Rachel died. "You look like you're expecting incoming." Garrett took the water. "Just a weird morning." "Weird how?" "Some asshole harassing a woman at the coffee shop. I stepped in." Wyatt's expression shifted. Not quite worry, more like recognition. And he didn't like being embarrassed. "Rhett, you can't save everyone." The words hung between them, weighted with history. Wyatt knew about Afghanistan, about the compound that was supposed to be a Taliban safe house and turned out to be a wedding, about the 3 civilians who died on Garrett's orders because intel was bad and split-second decisions had permanent consequences. Garrett drained half the water bottle. "I wasn't trying to save anyone, just stopped a creep from harassing someone." "Right. And that someone wouldn't happen to be Victoria Sterling, would it?" The name meant nothing. Garrett's confusion must have shown because Wyatt pulled out his phone, scrolled for 10 seconds, and turned the screen around. Forbes article. Photo of a woman in that same charcoal suit standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling windows with Denver sprawling behind her. The headline read, "Sterling Enterprises CEO doubles valuation in 3 years." That's her bio. That's her. You just played white knight for one of the richest women in Colorado. Garrett handed back the phone. "Doesn't change anything." "It changes everything, kid. People like that, they're used to getting what they want. And if she decides she wants to thank you properly, you won't have a choice." The afternoon passed in the rhythm of physical labor. Garrett lost himself in the satisfaction of measuring, cutting, fitting pieces together with the kind of accuracy that left no room for error or introspection. By 3:30, he'd almost convinced himself Wyatt was wrong. Then he opened his truck door and found the envelope on the driver's seat. His hands went cold. The envelope was expensive, cream-colored, sealed. He looked around the parking lot, empty except for the construction crew's vehicles, and cracked it open. The photo inside showed Sophie on the playground at Little Learners, red jacket bright against the mulch, Mr. Bear tucked under one arm. She was laughing at something, head thrown back. Blonde hair catching sunlight. Someone had been watching his daughter. The note was brief, typed, no signature except 2 letters, PW. Cute kid. Shame if something happened. Garrett's vision tunneled. His breathing went shallow and controlled the way it had in combat when adrenaline needed direction or it would eat you alive from the inside. He pulled out his phone with hands that wanted to shake and refused to let them. "Wyatt, I need you to check the security on my apartment. Now, depicting." "What's going on?" "Someone's been watching Sophie. I think it's the guy from this morning." Static on the line. Then Wyatt's voice stripped of its usual warmth. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything stupid." Garrett made it to Little Learners in 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. His mind ran scenarios the way it used to run tactical assessments. Threat identified. Response options. Acceptable losses. Except when the threatened asset was your 4-year-old daughter, there were no acceptable losses. Sophie burst through the preschool doors at 4:02, backpack bouncing, completely unaware that her father's world had just tilted sideways. She launched herself into his arms with the trust that children gave freely and adults guarded like state secrets. "Daddy, we painted today and Miss Sarah said my butterfly was the prettiest and can we have pizza for dinner?" Garrett held her tighter than necessary. "Sure, Buttercup. Pizza sounds perfect." In the truck was Sophie strapped into her booster seat and narrating Mr. Bear's opinions on dinner toppings. Garrett made the call he'd been avoiding since throwing that business card away. The number went straight to voicemail. Professional. Clipped. Victoria Sterling's voice carried the same authority it had in the coffee shop, instructing him to leave a message. "This is Garrett Hayes from this morning. I need to know who that man was. He's threatening my daughter. Call me back." His phone rang before he made it 3 blocks. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't expect to hear from you." Her voice came through clear, no speakerphone echo. Wherever Tori Sterling was, she'd prioritized this call enough to answer directly. Garrett kept his tone flat, factual. The man from this morning, I need his name. Why? Because he left a photo of my daughter on my truck seat with a note about what a shame it would be if something happened to her. The line went quiet, not empty quiet, the kind of silence that came from someone processing information and running their own calculations. When Tori spoke again, her voice carried steel. Preston Wade, he runs Pinnacle Capital, hedge fund management, old money, connected, vindictive. Where does he work? Mr. Hayes, Garrett, and I need an address. You're not going to confront him. Preston isn't the kind of man you handle with direct action. He fights with lawyers and leverage and money. If you go after him, he'll destroy you. Garrett's hands tightened on the wheel. Sophie was singing now some preschool song about butterflies and sunshine, completely oblivious to the danger circling their carefully controlled life. He's threatening my daughter. What am I supposed to do? Let me help you. I have resources, lawyers, people who know how to fight men like Preston without becoming targets. I don't need charity. This isn't charity. This is guilt. Tori's voice softened fractionally. Preston went after you because of me, because you defended me. That makes this my responsibility. Garrett pulled into the parking lot of the pizza place Sophie loved, turned off the engine, watched his daughter unbuckle herself with the kind of fierce independence that Rachel would have been proud of. I don't know how to fight people like him. I do. Meet me tomorrow. Riverside Diner, 12:30. We'll figure this out. She hung up before he could argue. Pizza became an exercise in maintaining normalcy while Garrett's mind built threat matrices. Sophie wanted pepperoni. Mr. Bear apparently preferred cheese. The teenager behind the counter looked at Garrett the way civilians always looked at veterans who'd seen too much, like he might detonate at any moment. Wyatt texted halfway through dinner. House is secure, no signs of entry, cameras installed, talk tomorrow. That night, after Sophie was asleep with Mr. Bear tucked under her chin and the nightlight casting soft shadows across her room, Garrett sat in his kitchen and stared at the photo Preston had left. The threat wasn't subtle. It was designed to terrify, to make Garrett understand that his daughter's safety was now contingent on Preston's goodwill. 3 years of building walls around his grief. 3 years of controlled routine and careful distance from anything that might crack the facade. And now some entitled asshole with a bruised ego had reached through all of it to touch the one thing Garrett would burn the world to protect. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Tomorrow, 12:30. Don't be late. Tori Garrett set the phone down and looked at Rachel's photo on the wall. The last good picture they'd had before cancer made photography feel obscene. She'd made him promise things in those final weeks. Promise me Sophie will have pancakes and play dates and a daddy who smiles. Promise me you won't become one of those tragic widowers who wears his grief like body armor. He'd kept most of those promises, but the one about letting people in, that one had proven harder. His phone rang at 6:45 the next morning. Garrett answered on the second ring, already knowing who it would be. Change of venue, my office. 10 a.m. We need to move on this before Preston does. I have work. Call in sick. This is more important. The line went dead. Garrett stared at his phone, torn between gratitude and resentment. Victoria Sterling didn't ask. She commanded. And he was just desperate enough to let her. Wyatt covered for him at the site without asking questions. That was the thing about veterans. They understood when a brother needed backup, even if they didn't understand why. Sophie went to preschool with extra hugs and reassurances that Daddy would pick her up exactly on time. Sterling Enterprises occupied the top 12 floors of a glass tower that screamed wealth and power. The elevator required a key card just to access the executive levels. The receptionist took one look at Garrett: work boots, faded jeans, flannel shirt, and her smile went from professional to uncertain. I'm here to see Victoria Sterling. Do you have an appointment? She called me. The receptionist's fingers flew across her keyboard. Confusion flickered across her face. Your name? Garrett Hayes. Whatever she saw on her screen made her straighten. Miss Sterling is expecting you. 40th floor, suite 4000. The elevator ride felt like ascending to a different planet. By the time the doors opened onto Sterling's executive floor, Garrett had cataloged 3 exits and 2 potential defensive positions without consciously meaning to. Old habits. Tori's office took up the corner of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Denver and the Rockies beyond the kind of vista that reminded you of your insignificance. She stood at one window, phone to her ear, gesturing sharply with her free hand. The conversation was clearly not going well. She ended the call and turned. This morning she wore navy and pearls hair, still pulled back with that same surgical precision, but her eyes sharp assessing softened when they landed on Garrett. Thank you for coming. Didn't feel like I had a choice. You always have a choice. This time I'm hoping you choose to trust me. She gestured to a conference table where a woman in her 40s sat with a laptop and several folders. Professional, expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who charged 4 figures per hour and won cases that shouldn't be winnable. Garrett Hayes, this is Sarah Keller. She's the best family law attorney in Colorado. I've briefed her on the situation. Sarah's handshake was firm, confident. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Mr. Hayes, Miss Sterling tells me Preston Wade is threatening your daughter. Do you have documentation? Garrett pulled out his phone and showed her the photo. Sarah studied it, her expression never changing, then made notes on her laptop. When did you receive this? Yesterday afternoon on my truck seat. I'd locked it at the doors. So, he either has someone who can pick locks or access to private investigators who can. That's useful. Useful how? Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. Because it establishes pattern. Preston Wade doesn't make empty threats. He follows through, which means we need to get ahead of this. Tori moved to sit beside Garrett, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. Sarah's going to help us build a case. But first we need to understand what we're dealing with. Preston isn't just vindictive. He's connected. His family has been in Denver society for 3 generations. He has lawyers on retainer judges who owe him favors and enough money to make problems disappear. Or create them. Exactly. Which is why I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Tori's gaze held steady. Is there anything in your past that Preston could use against you? Anything that might make a custody challenge look credible? Garrett's throat went tight. Afghanistan flashed through his mind, the compound, the explosion, the child's body. He'd been cleared. The investigation concluded that faulty intel, not faulty judgment, had caused civilian casualties. But cleared and innocent weren't always the same thing. I have PTSD from deployment. I'm in therapy. Sarah typed without looking up. That's actually good. Shows you're addressing it. Anything else? The weight of his secret pressed against Garrett's chest. But he'd learned in the Army that sometimes you kept your cards close until you knew the full shape of the battle. Nothing that would affect my ability to parent. He caught Tori's eyes and saw something there, not quite doubt, but a kind of understanding that she knew he was holding back. She didn't push. Sarah closed her laptop. Here's what's going to happen. Preston is going to come at you through the system. He'll file a CPS report alleging neglect or instability. He'll manufacture evidence if he needs to. Your job is to be perfect for the next 6 weeks. Perfect house, perfect routine, perfect documentation of every aspect of Sophie's care. I already do that. Good. Do it better. I'll need copies of all financial records, Sophie's medical files, school reports, character references. We're going to build a fortress around your parenting that no social worker can penetrate. Garrett looked between the 2 women. Tori Sterling, who'd built an empire from nothing and now wielded power the way some people wielded scalpels, precisely effectively. Sarah Keller, who radiated competence and the kind of confidence that came from winning cases that mattered. And him, a construction worker with a dead wife, a traumatized past, and a daughter he'd die to protect. Why are you helping me? Tori's smile was small, genuine. Because you helped me when you had nothing to gain. That's rarer than you'd think. The meeting lasted another hour. Sarah walked Garrett through the documentation requirements, the likely timeline of any CPS investigation, the ways Preston might escalate. By the time Garrett left Sterling Enterprises, he had a clear action plan and a growing sense that he'd just enlisted in a war he didn't fully understand. His phone rang as he reached his truck. Wyatt, boss wants to know if you're coming back today. Yeah, be there in 20. Rhett, one more thing. That woman who visited yesterday, Victoria Sterling, she just bought the building we're renovating. Garrett's hand stilled on the door handle. What? Closed the deal this morning. Hayes and Sons just went from being contractors to being her contractors. Thought you should know. The call ended. Garrett stood in the parking garage surrounded by vehicles that cost more than he'd make in 5 years and tried to process what it meant that Tori Sterling was now technically his employer. She was building something, a structure of protection around him and Sophie, using her resources to create leverage against Preston Wade. And Garrett didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. Both probably. The next 2 days passed in a blur of documentation and hypervigilance. Garrett photographed every meal, every interaction with Sophie, every aspect of their routine. Sarah's paralegal set up a shared folder where he uploaded proof of paid bills, on-time rent, Sophie's perfect attendance, and health records. He scheduled appointments with Dr. Helen Park, his therapist, and got written statements about his progress managing PTSD symptoms. Wyatt helped without being asked, providing character references and offering to testify if needed. Kate, Wyatt's wife, brought over casseroles and watched Sophie when Garrett needed to meet with Sarah. The construction crew closed ranks around him in that particular way military families did. No questions, just support. On Thursday afternoon, exactly 2 days after Garrett received Preston's threat, a woman in her 50s appeared at Little Learner's pickup line. She wore the kind of sensible clothing that screamed government employee and carried a badge that made Garrett's blood run cold. Linda Vaughn, Child Protective Services. Mr. Hayes, I need a moment of your time. Sophie clutched Garrett's hand, sensing tension even if she didn't understand it. Garrett positioned himself between his daughter and the social worker without conscious thought. About what? Linda's expression remained professionally neutral. We've received a report regarding Sophie's welfare. I need to schedule a home visit to assess the situation. A report from who? I'm not at liberty to disclose that information. It's standard procedure. Standard procedure, like hell it was. Garrett's jaw tightened, every instinct screaming at him to grab Sophie and run. But running would only confirm whatever lies Preston had fed CPS. When tomorrow afternoon, 2 p.m. at your residence, Linda handed him a card. Please have the following documentation ready: proof of income, proof of housing, Sophie's medical records, and any relevant information about your child care arrangements. She left without waiting for acknowledgement. Garrett stood in the preschool parking lot, Sophie pressed against his leg, and felt the careful life he'd built start to crack. In the truck, Sophie asked the question he had been dreading. Daddy, is that lady going to take me away? The fear in her voice nearly broke him. Garrett pulled over 2 blocks from home, unbuckled, and climbed into the back seat beside her. He took her small hands in his calloused ones and made his voice steady. No, sweetheart, nobody's taking you anywhere. That lady just needs to make sure you're happy and healthy, which you are. It's like when the doctor checks if you're sick, but you're not sick, so there's nothing to worry about. You promise, God help him, he promised, even knowing that promises were just words, and Preston Wade had lawyers who could turn words into weapons. That night, after Sophie was finally asleep and Garrett had checked the locks 3 times, he called Tori. She answered on the first ring. He did it. CPS is coming tomorrow. How did you know? Because it's what I would do if I wanted to destroy someone using the system. Preston's predictable. Her voice carried none of the warmth from their previous conversations. This was the CEO speaking, the strategist. Sarah's already on it. She'll be there tomorrow during the home visit. And Garrett? This is going to be okay. You can't promise that. No, but I can fight like hell to make it true. The home visit lasted 3 hours. Linda Vaughn and her colleague James Porter went through every inch of Garrett's apartment with the thoroughness of people trained to find problems. They checked the refrigerator, stocked with healthy food, nothing expired. They inspected Sophie's room clean, age-appropriate toys, no safety hazards. They reviewed financial records, medical files, school reports. Sarah Keller sat at the kitchen table throughout, making notes and occasionally interjecting with points of clarification. Her presence transformed the visit from interrogation to procedural formality. Linda interviewed Sophie separately. Through the thin walls, Garrett heard his daughter's bright voice explaining that Daddy made the best pancakes, that Mr. Bear slept with her every night, that she missed Mommy, but Daddy talked about her so she wouldn't forget. After 90 minutes, Linda emerged from Sophie's room and pulled Garrett aside. Mr. Hayes, I'm going to be frank with you. The complaint we received paints a concerning picture: PTSD, financial instability, inadequate childcare. What I'm seeing here doesn't match that narrative at all. Because it's not true. I believe you. but I still have to complete the investigation. We'll do 2 more follow-up visits over the next 6 weeks. If everything remains consistent with what I'm seeing today, I'll close the case with a finding of unfounded. 6 weeks. Standard procedure for this type of complaint. I'm sorry. After they left, Garrett sat on his couch and stared at the wall. 6 weeks of living under a microscope. 6 weeks of one mistake away from losing Sophie. 6 weeks of Preston Wade holding his daughter's future hostage. Sarah packed her files with efficient movements. That went well. Linda Vaughn is fair. She knows when she's being used as a weapon in someone else's war. But she still has to investigate. Unfortunately, yes. The system is designed to protect children, which means it can be weaponized against parents. Preston knows that. So we play the long game, and we don't give CPS any reason to doubt you. After Sarah left, Garrett found Tori still there. She'd arrived halfway through the home visit and stayed in the background, a silent presence that somehow made everything feel less insurmountable. You didn't have to stay. I know, I wanted to. They stood in a small kitchen, the space feeling even smaller with her wealth and power and barely contained intensity filling it. Garrett looked at her, really looked, and saw past the armor of expensive clothes and careful control to something that looked almost like loneliness. Can I ask you something? Always. Why are you really doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. But you've spent days and probably thousands of dollars fighting my battle. Why? Tori was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability he hadn't heard before. Because for 20 years, I've been surrounded by people who want something from me. Money access association with my name. And you stepped between me and danger without knowing who I was or what you'd get in return. You were just decent, and I'd forgotten what that looked like. She moved toward the door, then paused. Also, Preston Wade is a narcissist who believes women and power exist for his personal gratification. Helping you fight him serves multiple purposes. After she left, Garrett sat in the silence of his apartment and tried to process the shape his life was taking. 3 days ago, he'd been invisible. Now he had a tycoon fighting his battles and a hedge fund manager orchestrating his destruction. The next morning brought a board meeting at Sterling Enterprises that Garrett knew nothing about. But Tori knew. She walked into the conference room to find her mother, Catherine, seated at the head of the table, a position that should have been Tori's, and Preston Wade sitting 2 seats down with the smile of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. Mother, what's Preston doing here? Catherine Sterling, 62, and carved from the same ice that formed glacier peaks, gestured dismissively. Mr. Wade has acquired 12% of Sterling Enterprises. As a major shareholder, he's entitled to board representation. The words landed like mortar rounds. Tori had spent 15 years building Sterling Enterprises from a tech startup to a diversified empire worth billions. She knew every shareholder, every percentage point. Preston Wade shouldn't have been able to acquire 12% without her knowledge, unless someone helped him. Tori looked at her mother and understood. This was Catherine's way of applying pressure, of reminding Tori that family expectations and social propriety mattered more than personal autonomy, that dating a construction worker with PTSD was unacceptable. Preston's smile widened. Victoria, always a pleasure. I've been reviewing Sterling's portfolio, and I have some thoughts about operational efficiency. The meeting devolved from there. Preston questioned every decision Tori had made in the last quarter. He suggested cuts to community programs that defined Sterling's reputation. He implied, without quite saying directly, that Tori's recent personal entanglements were affecting her professional judgment. When the meeting finally ended, Tori stayed seated while the other board members filed out. Catherine lingered by the door. Victoria, this is for your own good. Letting Preston Wade buy into my company. How is that for my good? He has resources, connections. If you just consider him as no, Tori stood every inch of her 5'7" frame, radiating controlled fury. Preston Wade is a vindictive narcissist who's threatening an innocent man's daughter because I rejected him, and you helped him buy into my company. Catherine's expression remained impassive. I helped him invest in a company that needed capital. What he does in his personal time is not my concern. It's exactly your concern when his personal time involves terrorizing someone. Tori caught herself. Someone I'm protecting. Are you protecting him? Or are you risking everything for a man who's clearly beneath you? The words hung between them, weighted with decades of maternal disappointment and daughterly rebellion. Tori gathered her files and walked out without answering. She called Garrett from her car. Preston just became a major shareholder in my company. He's escalating. Jesus, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. This is what he does. He finds your pressure points and applies leverage until you break. But he doesn't know who he's dealing with. Tori, I need you to understand something, Garrett. I'm not helping you out of guilt or charity or some savior complex. I'm helping you because Preston Wade represents everything I've spent my adult life fighting against. Men who believe power is for taking and women are for owning. And I'll be damned if I let him win. She ended the call and sat in the parking garage surrounded by vehicles that cost more than most people's houses and felt something shift inside her chest. She'd built walls around her heart the same way Garrett had built walls around his life. Protection through distance, safety through control. But protection only worked if you were willing to stay locked inside it forever. Her phone buzzed, text from Garrett. Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay this, Tori typed back without thinking. A man isn't measured by his bank account. He's measured by what he builds with his own hands and how he treats people who can't repay him. She hit send before she could second-guess the vulnerability in those words. This was dangerous territory. Getting emotionally invested in someone whose life was under siege. Someone whose 4-year-old daughter reminded her of everything she'd sacrificed for career and independence. Someone who looked at her like she was human instead of an acquisition target. That evening in Preston's glass and steel office 40 floors above Denver, he made a call to a private investigator who specialized in finding things people wanted hidden. I need everything on Garrett Hayes, military records, deployment history, classified or not, I don't care. Find me something I can use. Sir, military records are sealed. Getting access to classified information could what? Be expensive, illegal. I'm paying you $50,000 to find leverage. Figure it out. Preston hung up and looked out at the city lights. Victoria Sterling thought she could choose some working-class nobody over him. She thought she could protect Hayes with lawyers and money and corporate maneuvering. She had no idea what Preston was capable of when people failed to understand their place. His phone rang, unknown number. Mr. Wade, this is Linda Vaughn from Child Protective Services. I wanted to inform you that we've completed our initial assessment of the Hayes household. I've found no evidence to support the allegations in your complaint. Preston's hand tightened on the phone. Then you didn't look hard enough. Actually, Mr. Wade, I looked very thoroughly, and I would like to discuss with you the penalties for filing false reports with CPS. Making fraudulent allegations is a misdemeanor that carries, "Are you threatening me?" I'm informing you that if you file another complaint against Mr. Hayes without credible evidence, you will be investigated for harassment and making false statements to a government agency. Have a good evening. The line went dead. Preston stood there, rage building like pressure behind his eyes. They thought they'd won. Hayes with his pathetic life, Sterling with her billions, Linda Vaughn with her bureaucratic authority. None of them understood that this was just the beginning. He pulled up the contact for his investigator and sent a text. Double the payment. I want Hayes's military record by end of week. Whatever it takes. The reply came back in seconds. Consider it done. Across town in his small apartment, Garrett read Sophie her bedtime story. She'd picked the one about the brave knight and the dragon, her favorite since she was 3. Tonight she kept interrupting with questions. Daddy, do dragons eat people? Only in stories, sweetheart. But what if there's a real dragon? Would you fight it? Garrett closed the book and looked at his daughter, 4 years old, Dawson, blonde hair that came from Rachel, blue eyes that came from him, a heart that trusted absolutely that Daddy could protect her from anything. If there were a real dragon threatening you, yeah, Buttercup, I'd fight it, even if you were scared. He thought about Preston Wade, about Linda Vaughn's warning that he had to be perfect for 6 weeks, about the walls closing in around his carefully controlled life, about the fear that woke him at 3 a.m., convinced that Sophie would be taken and he'd be powerless to stop it, especially if I were scared. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Sophie considered this with the gravity of a philosopher contemplating existence. Then she smiled and kissed his cheek. "You're very brave, Daddy." Garrett tucked her in, turned on the nightlight, and stood in the doorway watching her drift off. She had no idea that the dragon was already here, that it wore a suit and wielded lawyers instead of fire, that it was circling closer every day. He'd spent 3 years building walls to keep the pain out. Now he needed those walls to keep the danger away from Sophie. And for the first time since Rachel died, Garrett wondered if maybe he didn't have to fight alone. His phone buzzed. Text from Tori. 6 weeks. We can do 6 weeks. Trust me. Garrett looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully. At Rachel's photo on the wall, her smile frozen in better times. At the life he'd built from grief and determination, and the stubborn refusal to let loss define him. He typed back, "I'm trusting you. Don't make me regret it." But even as he sent the message, part of him knew it was already too late. Not for regret, for something else entirely. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. And hope, Garrett had learned, was the most dangerous variable of all. 3 weeks into the CPS investigation, and Garrett's life had become a performance reviewed by invisible judges. Every meal documented, every interaction with Sophie measured against some hypothetical standard of perfect parenting. The second home visit had gone smoothly, Linda Vaughn finding nothing to criticize in the clean apartment, the well-adjusted child, the father who was clearly trying his damnedest. But trying his damnedest meant sleepless nights and hypervigilance that bled into every moment. The PTSD symptoms he'd managed to keep at arm's length for 3 years were creeping back with a vengeance. Nightmares, startle responses, the constant sense that danger lurked just beyond his peripheral vision. Tori had become a fixture in his life without either of them quite discussing how or why. She appeared at Sophie's preschool events at the construction site, with coffee during lunch breaks at his apartment in the evenings to help with dinner and homework. It felt natural in a way that should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like breathing after years of holding his breath. Tonight, she'd stayed late helping Sophie with a craft project involving entirely too much glitter. By the time they got the 4-year-old scrubbed clean and tucked into bed, it was past 10, and Tori was yawning despite her best efforts to hide it. "You should go home. It's late." Tori looked at him from where she sat on his couch, shoes kicked off, hair finally escaping its usual severe styling. She looked younger like this, less like a CEO and more like a woman who'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without armor. "I will. Just give me 10 minutes to stop seeing glitter when I close my eyes." Those 10 minutes stretched to 30, then an hour. Garrett moved around his small space, locking doors, checking windows, running through the security protocols that never quite kept the anxiety at bay. When he emerged from Sophie's room after his third check that she was breathing, sleeping safe, Tori was watching him with something that looked like understanding. "You don't have to explain it." "Explain what?" "Why you check on her so much. I've watched you do it every night I've been here. You're not being paranoid, you're being vigilant. There's a difference." Garrett sat on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining distance because proximity to Tori Sterling was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with Preston Wade or CPS investigations. Rachel used to do the same thing, check on Sophie every few hours. I thought it was new parent anxiety. Then she got sick, and I realized she was checking because she knew she wouldn't always be there to protect her. "So now you check for both of you." "Something like that." Tori shifted, drawing her legs up under her in a way that made her look almost vulnerable. "Can I tell you something? And you promise not to think I'm terrible." "I already think you're terrifying. Terrible would be an improvement." Her laugh was soft, genuine. "I spent 20 years building Sterling Enterprises to prove to my father that I was worth something. He died before I could show him. Heart attack in his study. And my first thought wasn't grief. It was rage that he'd robbed me of the chance to make him see me." "That doesn't make you terrible. It makes me pathological. I've built an empire on spite and daddy issues. I don't have friends. I have colleagues and competitors. I don't have relationships. I have transactions. And then you step between me and Preston Wade without calculating what you'd get in return, and it broke something in me." Garrett looked at her across 3 feet of couch cushions. Victoria Sterling, billionaire, Forbes list regular. Woman who could buy and sell his entire life with a phone call. And underneath all that wealth and power, someone who was just as lonely as he was. "I'm not any better. I've spent 3 years in autopilot. Wake up, take care of Sophie, work, come home, repeat. I convinced myself that surviving was enough, that wanting more than that was betraying Rachel's memory. And now I have a vindictive hedge fund manager threatening my daughter's CPS, watching my every move, and you inserting yourself into my life for reasons I still don't fully understand. Surviving isn't optional anymore. I have to actually fight. Tori opened her mouth to respond when Garrett's phone buzzed. Text from Wyatt: Sophie safe. All clear on security check. Get some sleep, right? Because Wyatt was running hourly security sweeps while Garrett was having emotionally intimate conversations with a woman who probably had meetings worth more than Garrett's annual salary scheduled for tomorrow morning. You should go. It's almost midnight. Tori nodded but didn't move immediately. Garrett, thank you. For what? For letting me be here. For not treating me like an A-team or a business opportunity. For seeing me as Tori instead of Sterling Enterprises. She gathered her things and left, and Garrett tried not to think about how empty his apartment felt without her in it. He showered, checked on Sophie one more time, and fell into bed with the exhaustion of someone who'd been running on adrenaline for 3 weeks straight. Sleep came hard. Staying asleep was harder. The nightmare started the way it always did. Desert heat, the weight of combat gear, intelligence briefing that identified the compound as a Taliban stronghold. Garrett Younger still believing in clear missions and cleaner outcomes, leading his team through the breach. Then the explosion. The screams. The realization that the intelligence was wrong, catastrophically wrong, and the compound wasn't a military target. It was a wedding. 3 civilians dead. One of them a child, 8 years old, boy wearing traditional clothes and clutching a toy truck. Garrett had fired the shot before he understood what he was looking at. By then it was too late to take it back. In the dream, the child's face kept changing. Sometimes it was the Afghan boy, sometimes it was Sophie, sometimes it was a child he'd never met but carried the weight of anyway. He woke up screaming, or he thought he woke up. His body was rigid muscles, locked breath coming in wafts, hands that knew how to kill gripping the sheets like they were trying to strangle the mattress. Then there were other hands, smaller, pulling at his shoulders. Garrett, wake up. His eyes snapped open. Tori, in his bedroom, wearing yesterday's clothes, backlit by the hallway light. She must have fallen asleep on the couch instead of going home. You were dreaming, shouting. It's okay, you're safe. Garrett's heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat soaked his t-shirt. His hands shook with the aftershock of nightmare adrenaline. Sophie, still sleeping. I checked. She didn't hear. He sat up, scrubbing both hands over his face, trying to force his brain back into present tense. I'm sorry, you shouldn't have seen that. Tori sat on the edge of his bed without asking permission. Close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. How often does this happen? Less than it used to. Dr. Park says it's getting better. What was it about? And there it was. The question he'd been avoiding since Sarah Keller first asked if there was anything in his past that Preston could weaponize. The secret he'd buried under 3 years of therapy and medication, and the stubborn insistence that being a good father now could somehow balance the scales for what he'd done then. Afghanistan, 2012. Bad intelligence said we were hitting a Taliban compound. It was a wedding. 3 civilians died, including a child. And the words came out flat, factual, the way he delivered his report to the investigating officers. But in the pre-dawn darkness of his bedroom with Tori Sterling sitting close enough to touch, they felt different. Heavier. I was cleared. Investigation concluded that faulty intel, not faulty judgment, caused the casualties. But cleared doesn't mean innocent. It just means the Army decided I followed procedure. Tori was quiet for a long moment, not the shocked silence of someone horrified, the thoughtful silence of someone processing information. You were following orders. I gave the orders. I was the ranking officer. Those deaths are on me. Garrett, you made a split-second decision in a war zone based on information provided by military intelligence. That doesn't make you a murderer. Tell that to the kid's family. I can't, but I can tell you that spending the rest of your life punishing yourself doesn't bring him back, and it doesn't make you a bad father to Sophie. Garrett looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her eyes that looked almost like understanding. Not pity, understanding, as if she too carried weight that never quite lifted. If Preston finds out about this, he'll use it. He'll leak it to CPS, to the media, to anyone who'll listen. I'll be the veteran who killed children and now has custody of a 4-year-old. Game over. Then we make sure he doesn't find out. Tori, no, listen to me. Preston Wade is a narcissist who believes he can destroy anyone who challenges him. But I've spent 20 years in boardrooms with men like him. They always overplay their hand, always. We just have to be ready when he does. She reached out and took his hand. Her palm was soft against his calluses. Warm, real, grounding him in the present instead of the nightmare. I spent 2 decades building an empire to prove I had value. Then one person showed up and reminded me that real worth doesn't need to be proven. You're a good man, Garrett Hayes. One mistake in war doesn't change that. The way she said it, absolute certainty, no room for argument, cracked something in Garrett's chest. The part that had been locked since Rachel died. The part that believed he didn't deserve second chances or happiness, or this woman sitting on his bed at 2 in the morning telling him he was worth saving. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Trust someone, let them in, risk caring about something I could lose. Tori's smile was small but genuine. You're already doing it. You're just scared, which means it matters. She stood, moving toward the door. Garrett caught her wrist before his brain could override the impulse. Stay. Garrett, not like that, just stay. I don't want to be alone right now. She studied him for a heartbeat. Then she nodded, kicked off her shoes, and climbed onto the bed beside him, fully clothed on top of the covers, close enough that he could feel her breathing. They lay there in the darkness, not touching, but somehow connected. And for the first time in 3 years, Garrett fell back asleep without checking the locks. Morning came too early. Garrett woke to find Tori gone, a note on his nightstand in sharp handwriting. Early meeting. Call if you need anything. T. He went through the motions of the morning routine. Sophie oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had happened while she slept. Pancakes, preschool drop-off, construction site where Wyatt gave him a look that said he knew something had shifted but wouldn't ask unless Garrett volunteered. The call came at 11:15. Unknown number. Garrett almost ignored it, then thought about Sophie and CPS and the 1,000 ways Preston could escalate. He answered on the 4th ring. Mr. Hayes, I hope I'm not interrupting. Male voice, smooth, educated. Not Preston. Someone who worked for Preston. Who is this? Let's call me a concerned citizen. I wanted to let you know that some very interesting classified documents regarding your military service have recently come into my possession. Documents detailing a rather unfortunate incident in Helmand Province, February 2012. Garrett's blood went cold. Where did you get those? That's not important. What's important is what I plan to do with them. See, my employer believes the citizens of Denver deserve to know that the man dating Victoria Sterling has a rather colorful past. War crimes, dead children, PTSD that's currently under investigation by Child Protective Services. Those files are classified, leaking them as a federal crime. Is it? How interesting. You should probably discuss that with your lawyers. The email goes out in 1 hour to every major news outlet in Colorado. Have a nice day, Mr. Hayes. The line went dead. Garrett stood in the middle of the construction site, surrounded by the sounds of power tools and shouted instructions, and felt his carefully controlled world detonate. Preston had found his secret, and in 1 hour it would be public knowledge. He called Tori. She answered immediately, background noise suggesting she was between meetings. Preston found it. Afghanistan. He's leaking the classified report to the press in an hour. Son of a bitch. Where are you? Job site. Leave now. Come to my office. We need Sarah and we need a strategy. Tori, there's no strategy for this. Once it's out there, I'm done. CPS will reopen the investigation. The judge will. Garrett, trust me. Get to my office. 1 hour. She hung up before he could argue. Garrett told Wyatt he was leaving, ignored the concerned questions, and drove to Sterling Enterprises with his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The conference room on the 40th floor had become a war room. Tori, Sarah Kellum, and a man Garrett didn't recognize, 30s expensive suit. The kind of sharp intelligence that came from crisis management at the highest levels. Garrett, this is Marcus Webb. He handles PR for Sterling Enterprises. Marcus, Garrett Hayes. Marcus shook hands with the efficiency of someone who charged by the minute. Ms. Sterling briefed me. We have approximately 45 minutes before Preston Wade's investigator sends classified military documents to the press. Our options are limited but not non-existent. Sarah leaned forward. We can sue for injunction, try to block the release. That takes time we don't have, and it confirms the documents exist. Tori paced the length of the conference room, heels clicking on marble. What if we get ahead of it? Release the information ourselves, control the narrative. You want me to hold a press conference admitting I killed civilians? I want you to own your story before Preston weaponizes it. Marcus, how fast can we set this up? Marcus was already on his phone. Downtown Press Club. I can have media there in 2 hours. But Mr. Hayes, you need to understand what you're walking into. Every word you say will be analyzed. If you show anger, they'll call you unstable. If you show no emotion, they'll call you cold. This is a tightrope. I've walked tightropes before. Not like this. Garrett looked around the room. 3 people who barely knew him, strategizing how to minimize the damage from his worst mistake. 3 people who had every reason to walk away and were instead standing with him. What do I say? Sarah pulled out a legal pad. The truth, but framed correctly. You were following orders based on faulty intelligence. 3 civilians died. You've carried that burden for 13 years. You've sought treatment. You're a devoted father. The leak is retaliation from someone with a personal vendetta. Will it work? Honestly, I don't know. But it's better than letting Preston control how the story breaks. 2 hours later, Garrett stood at a podium in the Denver Press Club, facing 30 journalists and twice that many cameras. The lights were too bright, the microphones too close. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to find cover, to not make himself a target. But Sophie was depending on him, and retreat wasn't an option. The prepared statement sat in front of him. 3 paragraphs crafted by Sarah and Marcus to convey remorse without admission of wrongdoing. Legal language designed to protect him from future liability, words that felt hollow compared to what needed to be said. Garrett pushed the statement aside. My name is Garrett Hayes. 13 years ago, I was a lieutenant in the Army Rangers serving in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. In February 2012, I received intelligence that a compound was being used as a Taliban safe house. I led my team in an engagement on that compound. His voice stayed level, factual, the way he delivered briefings a lifetime ago. The intelligence was wrong. The compound wasn't a safe house. It was a wedding. 3 civilians died in that engagement. One of them was an 8-year-old boy. Flash of cameras, murmur of reporters. Garrett kept talking before the questions could start. I was cleared by military investigation. They concluded that I followed proper procedure based on the intelligence provided. But being cleared doesn't change the outcome. 3 people died because I gave the order to engage. I've spent 13 years carrying that weight. I've been in therapy. I've worked to become a man worthy of my daughter's trust. He looked directly into the cameras, thinking about Sophie watching this someday, thinking about the life he was about to lose. Someone leaked classified military documents because they want to destroy me. Not because I'm dangerous, not because I'm unfit, but because I defended a woman from harassment, and that bruised his ego. The system that's supposed to protect children is being weaponized to take my daughter from me. And I'm here today to own my past so that my past can't be used as a weapon. His hands gripped the podium. I made a terrible mistake in a war zone. I've spent every day since trying to be better, trying to be the father my daughter deserves. And I'm asking you, asking everyone watching to see me as a whole person, not just my worst moment. The questions came like incoming fire. Garrett answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't, and tried not to think about how thoroughly he was dismantling his own life in real time. Then Tori was there, stepping up to the podium without warning or permission. The camera swiveled to catch her. My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm the woman Garrett Hayes defended. I've watched him be harassed, threatened, and investigated because he had the decency to help a stranger. I've seen him be a devoted father, a good man, someone who carries his mistakes honestly instead of burying them. She looked at Garrett, and something in her expression shifted, softened, became almost vulnerable. I'm in love with him. I'm saying that publicly on record because I want everyone to know that this isn't charity or pity or guilt. This is me choosing a man who sees me as human instead of as an acquisition. And if that costs me my company, my reputation, my standing in this city, then so be it. Some things matter more than wealth. The press room exploded. Questions shouted over each other, cameras flashing. Garrett stood frozen while Tori Sterling, Victoria Sterling, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, declared her love in front of the entire Denver media establishment. Sarah stepped in, ending the press conference before the chaos could escalate further. Marcus herded them toward the exit while journalists shouted for follow-up quotes. In the car with tinted windows blocking out the madness, Tori finally looked at Garrett. I should have asked before saying that. Which part? The love part or the public declaration part? Both. Garrett's phone was already exploding with notifications. Texts from Wyatt, missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize, news alerts with headlines that made his stomach drop. Billionaire CEO defends boyfriend's war crime past Sterling Enterprises. Stock drops 8% amid scandal. Victoria Sterling risks empire for controversial relationship. I've destroyed you. Tori took his phone and turned it off. No, you've been honest. There's a difference. Your stock is dropping. Your reputation. My reputation is based on being ruthless and calculating. Maybe it's time I had a reputation for being human instead. The car delivered them back to Sterling Enterprises, where an emergency board meeting was already underway. Catherine Sterling had convened it the moment the press conference aired. Tori walked into the conference room to find her mother at the head of the table and Preston Wade sitting 2 seats down with a smile that suggested he'd already won. Victoria, how nice of you to join us. Mother, what's the meaning of this? The board has concerns about your recent behavior and its impact on company valuation. We're voting on whether to review your position as CEO. The room went silent. Tori had built this company from nothing, grown it through will and strategy in 16-hour workdays. And now her own mother was calling for her removal because she'd chosen to love someone beneath her station. On what grounds? Preston leaned forward, all false concern. On the grounds that you're emotionally compromised, dating a man under CPS investigation, risking shareholder value for a personal relationship, publicly declaring love for someone with documented PTSD and a history of civilian casualties. The optics alone. The optics are that I'm human. Since when is that grounds for removal? Since you stopped thinking like a CEO and started thinking like a lovesick teenager. Catherine cleared her throat. We're not removing you, Victoria. We're simply reviewing whether additional oversight is needed. A vote to establish a review committee. Standard corporate governance. Standard corporate governance that would strip Tori of autonomy and give Preston exactly what he wanted: control. The vote was called. 7 board members. 4 voted in favor of review, 2 against. Catherine abstained, which was worse than voting yes, because it meant that she was washing her hands of her daughter's choices. Motion passes. The review committee will be formed by end of week. Tori stood gathering her files with hands that wanted to shake. I built this company. Not you, Mother. Not any of you. And I'll be damned if I let you take it because I fell in love with a good man. She walked out before anyone could respond. In her office with Denver spread out 40 floors below, Tori called Garrett. They voted to review my CEO position. Preston's winning. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. If I just don't you dare apologize for being honest. Tori pressed her forehead against the cool glass. I spent 20 years building an empire to prove I didn't need anyone. And you know what? I was miserable. Successful and alone and absolutely miserable. What are you saying? I'm saying you asked me why I'm doing this, why I'm fighting for you. It's because I'd rather have you and lose everything than have everything and lose you. The line was quiet for a long moment, then Garrett's voice rough with emotion. Rachel used to tell me that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. Love was choosing someone you were willing to be imperfect with. She was wise. She was. And she'd be furious with me right now for pushing you away when you're offering something I convinced myself I didn't deserve. Do you deserve it? I don't know, but I want to try finding out. That evening, while Tori navigated the aftermath of the board vote and the press continued their feeding frenzy, Preston Wade sat in his office and realized his strategy was backfiring. The press conference should have destroyed Garrett Hayes. Instead, social media was exploding with support. Hashtags trending, people calling Tory's declaration brave and authentic. His phone rang. Private investigator. Mr. Wade, we have a problem. The FBI just contacted me about the classified documents. They're investigating how I obtained them. This could become a federal case. I paid you to, you paid me to commit a crime, and now I'm being investigated for it. I strongly suggest you retain legal counsel. The line went dead. Preston stood at his window looking out at Denver and felt control slipping through his fingers. He'd underestimated Victoria Sterling, underestimated Garrett Hayes, underestimated the power of people choosing honesty over image. But he wasn't done yet. His phone buzzed. Text from Catherine Sterling. Emergency board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. This ends one way or another. Preston smiled. Catherine was finally seeing sense. Tomorrow they'd remove Victoria from Sterling Enterprises and Preston would step in as interim CEO. He'd take the company. He'd destroy Hayes. He'd show Victoria what happened when women chose wrong. He called his lawyer. I need you at Sterling Enterprises tomorrow, 9 a.m. This is going to get interesting. What Preston didn't know was that Tory had made calls of her own, to the FBI, to journalists covering corporate malfeasance, to shareholders who remembered when Sterling Enterprises was about innovation instead of quarterly earnings, and to Sarah Keller, who specialized in making problems disappear through creative application of federal law. The next morning, Tory walked into the boardroom at 8:55. Board members already seated. Preston present with his lawyer. Catherine at the head of the table, expression unreadable. Let's begin. The matter before us is... The door opened. FBI Special Agent Marcus Reynolds stepped in, followed by two Denver PD detectives. Preston Wade, you're under arrest for unauthorized disclosure of classified information, corporate espionage, and attempted extortion. You have the right to remain silent. The room erupted. Preston lunged to his feet, face going red. This is ridiculous. You paid Nathan Cross $50,000 to obtain classified military records through illegal means. Mr. Cross is currently cooperating with federal authorities and has provided documentation of your communications. You also purchased 12% of Sterling Enterprises through shell companies for the purpose of intimidating Ms. Sterling. That's corporate extortion under Colorado law. The detectives moved in producing handcuffs. Preston tried to resist, which only made it worse. His lawyer was already on the phone, undoubtedly calculating billable hours. Tory watched Preston being led away and felt something close to satisfaction. Not victory, just the quiet certainty that sometimes justice actually worked. Catherine remained seated, face pale. Victoria, I didn't know. Yes, you did. You helped him buy into my company. You voted to review my position. You chose his side over mine. I was trying to protect you. From what happiness, love being human. Tory gathered her files. I'm calling for a vote. Either I remain CEO with full autonomy or I walk. And if I walk, I take every patent, every key employee, and every innovation that makes Sterling Enterprises valuable. Your choice. The vote was unanimous. Tory retained her position with no oversight committee. Afterwards, standing in her office with Denver stretching below, Tory called Garrett. Preston's in custody, federal charges, he won't be bothering us again. And your position? Secure. Turns out the board prefers a CEO who wins over one who plays nice. Tory, I need to see you. Can you come here? Sophie's at Wyatt's. I can be there in 20 minutes. Good, because I've spent the last 24 hours risking everything for you, and I need to know if you're willing to risk something too. Name it. Your walls, your control, your belief that you don't deserve this. I need you to risk letting me in completely. I'm already there. Have been since you stayed when I had that nightmare. Then come here and prove it. Garrett made it in 15 minutes. Preston's arrest triggered a cascade of consequences that unfolded over the following week. The FBI investigation revealed a network of illegal activity, corporate espionage blackmail attempts against multiple Denver executives, insider trading facilitated through his hedge fund. Pinnacle Capital collapsed within 72 hours, investors fleeing like rats from a sinking vessel. Linda Vaughn appeared at Garrett's apartment on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after her last scheduled visit. She carried a folder but no clipboard, which felt significant somehow. "Mr. Hayes, I wanted to deliver this personally." She handed him a single sheet of paper, official CPS letterhead, case number, and at the bottom in bureaucratic language that somehow felt like redemption, finding unfounded. Case closed. The complaint against you was clearly retaliatory. Preston Wade is facing federal charges that include filing false reports with multiple government agencies. You're free and clear, Mr. Hayes. Sophie stays with you. Garrett's knees went weak. 6 weeks of living under a microscope. 6 weeks of hypervigilance and documentation, and the constant fear that one mistake would cost him everything. Over. Thank you for being fair, for seeing through Preston's manipulation. Linda's smile was tired but genuine. I've been doing this job for 25 years. I know when the system's being weaponized. You're a good father, Mr. Hayes. Sophie's lucky to have you. After she left, Garrett sat on his couch and cried for the first time since Rachel's funeral. Not from grief this time. From relief so profound it felt like drowning in reverse. Sophie found him 10 minutes later, still wiping his eyes, and climbed into his lap with the certainty that Daddy could always use a hug. Why are you sad? I'm not sad, Buttercup. I'm happy. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy. That's weird. Yeah, it really is. That evening, Tori arrived with champagne and Chinese takeout, a combination that shouldn't work but somehow did. Sophie was already in bed dreaming whatever 4-year-olds dreamed about, and Garrett found himself alone with the woman who'd dismantled his carefully constructed walls without ever asking permission. To Preston Wade, spending the next decade in federal prison. They clinked glasses. Tori had changed out of her work armor into jeans and a sweater that made her look younger, more accessible, less like a CEO, and more like someone he might actually deserve. Sarah called. Preston's lawyer is already negotiating a plea deal. Apparently facing 20 years tends to make people cooperative. Good, he deserves worse. Probably, but I'll settle for him being gone. Tori set down her glass and looked at Garrett with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. So, Preston's arrested. CPS closed the case. Your secret's public. But you survived it. What happens now? I don't know. I've spent 6 weeks in crisis mode. Haven't really thought past surviving. Maybe that's the problem. You're so good at surviving that you forgot how to live. The words landed with precision. Garrett thought about the last 3 years. Wake up, work, come home, repeat. Existing in the space between grief and whatever came after. Protecting Sophie from his own unprocessed trauma by refusing to process it at all. I don't know how to do anything else. Then learn. With me. She moved closer, close enough that Garrett could feel the warmth of her smell, the faint trace of perfume that probably cost more than his monthly rent. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to try, to let yourself want things again, to believe that you're allowed to be happy. What if I screw it up? What if I'm too broken to, Tori kissed him before he could finish the sentence. Soft at first, almost tentative, then deeper as he responded. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and for the first time since Rachel died, he let himself feel want without guilt chasing it. They broke apart, breathing hard. Tori's eyes were dark lips, slightly swollen hair finally escaping its usual severe styling. You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. Stay tonight. Really stay. Not just on the couch. Are you sure? Garrett thought about Rachel's last words. About promises to live instead of just survive. About Sophie asking if he was lonely and him lying through his teeth. I'm terrified, but yeah, I'm sure. They made love in his small bedroom with the door locked and the baby monitor turned low. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets that smelled like both of them, Tori traced patterns on his chest. Can I ask you something about Rachel? Always. Do you still love her? Garrett had been expecting this question eventually. Yes, but not in a way that competes with what I feel for you. She's part of who I am, part of what made me capable of loving anyone. I can't erase her without erasing pieces of myself. I'm not asking you to erase her. I just need to know there's room for me in there too. There's room, more than room. He turned to face her, brushing hair back from her face. Rachel made me promise I'd be happy again. that I'd let myself love someone. I think she'd like you. Even though I'm a workaholic control freak with trust issues, she had a thing for broken people who were trying to be better. Tori's laugh was soft, unguarded. Then we should get along great. Morning brought Sophie bouncing into Garrett's room at 6:45, stopping short when she saw Tori still there, hair messy, wearing one of Garrett's t-shirts. Tori, did you have a sleepover? I did. Is that okay? Sophie considered this with the gravity of someone making important decisions. Then she launched herself onto the bed between them, giggling as they pretended to be crushed under her weight. Yes, but next time I want to have a sleepover too. Deal. But right now, how about we make breakfast together? They stumbled into the kitchen, Garrett making coffee, Tori attempting pancakes with Sophie's enthusiastic assistance, the radio playing classic rock at low volume. It felt domestic, normal, like a glimpse of what life could be if they stopped fighting it. Wyatt stopped by later that morning, ostensibly to return tools, but really to check on Garrett. They stood in the small backyard while Sophie played with chalk on the patio. You look different. Different how? Less like you're waiting for incoming. More like you might actually be okay. Garrett watched Sophie draw elaborate butterflies in pink and purple. Preston's in custody. CPS closed the case. Things are finally settling. And Victoria Sterling, what about her? Wyatt's smile was knowing. Kid, I've known you for 3 years. You've been in survival mode since Rachel died. Now you're standing in your backyard on a Saturday morning, looking almost relaxed. That's not just because Preston's gone. She makes me want to try. For the first time since Rachel, I'm thinking past next week, past next month, thinking about actual future tense. That's good. Rachel would be happy. Wyatt pulled 2 beers from the cooler he'd brought, handed one to Garrett, despite it being 10 in the morning. Can I tell you something? When Sarah died, Garrett blinked. You're Sarah. Yeah, first wife. Before Kate, cancer, same as Rachel. I was 32 and completely destroyed. Wyatt took a long pull from his beer. I spent 5 years convinced I'd used up my lifetime allotment of love. Then Kate showed up and reminded me that the heart's bigger than we think. That loving someone new doesn't diminish what came before. How long before you stopped feeling guilty? About 2 years. Then one day Kate asked me to tell her a story about Sarah, and I realized I could talk about my first wife with my second wife, and it felt okay. Like I was honoring Sarah by not pretending she didn't exist. Sophie ran over, demanding that Wyatt come see her butterfly masterpiece. He went willingly, leaving Garrett with half a beer and the realization that maybe he wasn't as alone in this as he'd thought. The weeks after Preston's arrest settled into something resembling normalcy. Tori still worked insane hours, but carved out time for dinner 3 nights a week for Saturday morning, pancakes for reading Sophie bedtime stories, and voices that made the 4-year-old collapse with laughter. Catherine Sterling remained conspicuously absent. The board meeting fallout had created a rift that neither woman seemed ready to bridge. Until a Tuesday afternoon in late November, when Catherine appeared at Garrett's construction site in a Mercedes sedan that looked wildly out of place among the work trucks. Garrett saw her talking to Wyatt, who pointed in his direction. He set down his tools and walked over, hyper-aware of his dusty jeans and the sweat staining his flannel. Mrs. Sterling. Mr. Hayes, do you have a moment? They walked away from the crew, finding relative privacy behind a concrete mixer. Catherine looked older than she had at the board meeting, less imperious and more uncertain. I came to apologize. Garrett waited. This was her show. I enabled Preston. I helped him buy into Sterling Enterprises because I thought he'd be good for Victoria. Someone from the right background, the right social circle, someone who understood our world. Catherine's voice cracked slightly. I was wrong about him, about what Victoria needs, about you. What changed your mind? I watched the press conference. I saw my daughter risk everything to defend you, and I realized that in 20 years of building Sterling Enterprises, I've never once seen her that passionate about anything. Not deals, not acquisitions, not even the company itself. She looked at Garrett directly. You make her human, and I've spent so long teaching her to be invulnerable that I'd forgotten humans are allowed to be vulnerable too. Why tell me this? Because you're going to marry her, maybe not today or next month, but eventually. And when you do, I want to be there. I want to be part of her life again. Part of your lives. Catherine's expression softened. I'd like to know my granddaughter. Garrett thought about Sophie, about the grandmother she'd never met because Rachel's parents had died before she was born, about the family they could build if he let go of his resentment. That's not my decision. It's Tori's. I know, but she respects you. If you tell her I'm not welcome, she'll listen. I'm not going to do that. But you need to understand something, Mrs. Sterling. Tori isn't yours to control or fix or mold into someone acceptable. She's her own person. And if you can't love her for who she actually is, then being in her life is just going to hurt her more. Catherine nodded slowly. You're right. You're also exactly what she needs. Someone who sees her clearly and loves her anyway. After she left, Garrett called Tori. Your mother just visited my job site. What, why? To apologize and to ask if she could be part of our lives again. The line went quiet. Then Tori's voice, small and unsure, in a way he rarely heard. What did you say? I said it was your decision. But Garrett, she seems genuine. And Sophie could use a grandmother. I'll think about it. 3 days later, Catherine and Tori met for lunch. It took 6 months of careful rebuilding, but eventually the rift healed into something resembling a functional relationship. Not perfect, but real. December brought the kind of cold that made even hardened construction workers question their career choices. Garrett had been working on the Riverside project for 2 months, the promotion Wyatt had mentioned back in September, before the world exploded. Better pay, more responsibility. The kind of advancement that came from proving himself reliable, even in crisis. He picked up Sophie from preschool on a Friday afternoon, the last day before winter break. She'd made him a snowflake from construction, paper, and glitter, explaining in elaborate detail the scientific process of snowflake formation as understood by 4-year-olds. Daddy, can we get hot chocolate? Sure, Buttercup. Riverside Café had become their place again, the site of everything beginning. Garrett ordered at the counter black coffee, hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and turned to find Sophie had claimed their usual table, the one where he'd first met Tori, where everything changed. Tori was already sitting there. Surprise? Sophie squealed and launched herself at Tori, who caught her with practiced ease. Garrett approached slowly, sensing something significant about to happen. I thought you had meetings until 6. I rescheduled. Sit down. There's something I need to say. Garrett sat. Tori looked nervous, which was wrong because Victoria Sterling didn't do nervous. She did controlled and commanding and occasionally vulnerable, but never nervous. 6 months ago, you stepped between me and a man who thought he was entitled to my attention. You didn't know who I was. You didn't want anything from me. You just did what was right. She reached across the table, taking his hand. And I've spent every day since falling in love with who you are when nobody's watching, with how you parent Sophie, with your integrity and your stubbornness and the way you're slowly learning to let yourself be happy. Tori, I'm not done. I spent 20 years building an empire to prove I had value. Then you showed up and reminded me that real worth doesn't need to be proven. It just exists. In how we treat people, in what we're willing to fight for, in choosing authenticity over appearance. She pulled a small box from her pocket, velvet, obviously expensive, set it on the table between them. I know this isn't traditional. I know you're probably planning your own proposal with proper timing and romance. But I've never been good at waiting for permission to take what I want. Garrett Hayes, will you marry me? The cafe had gone quiet. Phones were out again, documenting this moment the way they documented his first intervention. Sophie was bouncing in her seat with barely contained excitement. Garrett looked at the ring box, at Tori, at his daughter, at the life he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve and was being offered anyway. No, Tori's face crumpled. Sophie gasped. Garrett reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own box. Because I'm proposing to you. The relief on Tori's face was almost comical. You asshole, you let me think. Yeah, I did. He opened the box, revealing a ring he'd spent 3 months' salary on. Simple platinum band with a single diamond. Nothing ostentatious, but chosen with care. Victoria Sterling, you crashed into my life when I was convinced I was done living. You fought for me when I didn't know how to fight for myself. You love my daughter like she's yours. You make me believe that second chances exist. Will you marry me? Yes, God, yes. but I'm still mad you made me think you were saying no. Consider it payback for buying the building I work in without telling me. They were both laughing and crying, and Sophie was demanding to see the rings, and the barista offered free coffee for everyone because apparently true love deserves celebration. Garrett slipped the ring onto Tori's finger. She slipped hers onto his. They sat there in Riverside Cafe, hands clasped across the table where everything began, and Garrett felt something unlock in his chest that had been closed since Rachel died. That night, after Sophie was asleep, and they were curled on his couch, planning a future that felt suddenly real, Garrett disappeared into his closet and returned with a wooden box he'd kept hidden for 3 years. "What is that?" "Something Rachel left. Her sister Kate gave it to me after the funeral. Said Rachel wanted me to have it when I was ready." He opened the box. Inside were letters, a dozen envelopes, each with a date written in Rachel's handwriting, some dated months before she died, some from her final weeks. The one on top was addressed simply, "For when you fall in love again." Garrett's hands shook. Tori moved closer, pressed against his side, silent support. "Do you want me to leave while you read it?" "No, stay. This involves you too." He opened the envelope carefully as if it might disintegrate. Rachel's handwriting covered 3 pages, slightly shaky from the medication, but still distinctly hers. "Garrett, if you're reading this, you've done something I wasn't sure you'd be capable of. You've let someone in. You've fallen in love again, and you're probably drowning in guilt about it. Don't. Listen, I know you. I know how your mind works. You're thinking that loving someone new means betraying me, that happiness without me is somehow wrong, that you're supposed to wear your grief like armor for the rest of your life. But here's the thing, I didn't fall in love with you because you were going to be a tragic widower someday. I fell in love with you because you were alive. Fully, completely, sometimes recklessly alive. And I need you to be that person again. For Sophie, for yourself, for whoever has been brave enough to crack through your walls. I've watched you these last few months. Even as I'm dying, you're already building the fortress you're going to live in after I'm gone. Controlled routine, emotional distance. The illusion that you can protect yourself from loss by refusing to risk love. It's not going to work. Loss comes anyway. All you'll do is deprive yourself of the life you could have had. So here's what I need you to hear. The woman you've fallen in love with isn't replacing me. She's continuing what we started. She's showing Sophie that families can grow instead of just breaking. She's giving you permission to be whole again. Love her the way you loved me, completely fearlessly, without apology. Love her knowing it might hurt someday, because that's what makes it valuable. And when you marry her, because I know you will know that I'm cheering you on from wherever the hell dead people go. A few practical notes. 1. Sophie's going to need therapy at some point. 4-year-olds don't process grief the same way adults do. Don't wait until there's a crisis. 2. My wedding ring is in the safe deposit box. Give it to Sophie when she's older. Tell her about me. Don't let me become a saint or a ghost, just a person who loved her. 3. The woman you're with now. She's probably terrified of not measuring up to me. Tell her she doesn't have to. She just has to love you and Sophie honestly. That's enough. Thank you for 10 years that were better than I deserved. Thank you for Sophie. Thank you for holding my hand when I was scared and making me laugh when I wanted to scream and loving me even when I was too sick to recognize myself. Now go live, not survive, live. All my love, Rachel. P.S. If you haven't already told Sophie that crying is okay, do it. You're emotionally constipated enough for both of you. Garrett finished reading with tears streaming down his face. Tori was crying too, holding him while he grieved and celebrated simultaneously. She knew I'd meet someone. She wanted you to be happy. That's not permission, that's love. They sat there for a long time processing the weight of Rachel's words. The gift she'd given him by refusing to let her death become a prison. Eventually, Garrett pulled himself together enough to call Sophie's preschool teacher and schedule the therapy appointments Rachel had predicted they'd need, to add the safe deposit box visit to his calendar, to start the process of honoring Rachel by actually living the way she'd demanded. The wedding was planned for April, 6 months to handle logistics and let the media circus die down. Tori wanted small and intimate. Garrett wanted Sophie to be involved in every decision. They compromised on a ceremony in the backyard of the house they'd bought together in February bigger than Garrett's duplex, smaller than Tori's penthouse, exactly right for a family starting over. Catherine helped with planning, tentatively rebuilding her relationship with Tori through shared Pinterest boards and venue tastings. Wyatt served as best man, giving toasts that made everyone laugh and cry. Sarah Keller attended with her husband and 3 kids, reminding Garrett that the lawyer who'd saved him also had a life outside billable hours. Sophie took her role as flower girl with the seriousness of a 4-year-old, given tremendous responsibility. She insisted on purple flowers because they were her favorite, a rainbow dress because compromise was for grown-ups, and that Mr. Bear had to be present because he'd been there through everything. The morning of the wedding, Garrett stood in his bedroom adjusting his tie for the 15th time. Wyatt appeared in the doorway, already dressed, holding a flask that probably contained something stronger than coffee. Nervous, terrified. What if I'm making a mistake? What if I'm not ready? What if, Rhett, stop. You're ready. You've been ready since the day she walked into your life and you let her stay. Rachel would be proud. She told you to live. This is living. Wyatt handed him the flask. One drink for courage. Then we go down there, and you marry the woman who fought for you when you couldn't fight for yourself. Garrett took a long pull, the whiskey burn going down, centering him. How do you know when it's right? You know because the fear of losing them is bigger than the fear of the risk. You know because they make you want to be better instead of different. You know because standing still suddenly feels like dying. When did you get so wise? 25 years of marriage to Kate. She beats wisdom into me daily. The ceremony took place at 4 in the afternoon with spring sunshine breaking through Colorado clouds. 50 people gathered in folding chairs arranged on new grass. Sophie stood at the front, gripping her basket of purple petals like it contained state secrets. Garrett waited at this makeshift altar, really just an arch that Wyatt had built with Sophie's enthusiastic assistance, trying not to think about how many people were watching or how thoroughly his life had changed in 9 months. Then Tori appeared. No veil, no train, just a simple white dress and her hair finally loose around her shoulders. She walked down the aisle alone, no father to give her away because she'd spent 40 years proving she belonged to herself. When she reached Garrett, she took his hands and smiled. Hi. Hi, you look like I'm about to legally bind myself to a man who once threw my business card in the trash. That seems accurate. The officiant, a judge who owed Tori a favor, began the ceremony. Standard vows with modifications they'd written together, promises about partnership and respect and letting each other be imperfect. When it came time for the rings, Sophie marched forward with the pillow she'd insisted on making herself. Half the flowers were glued upside down. The rings were tied on with what appeared to be 4 different types of ribbon. It was perfect. Garrett's vow came out steadier than he'd expected. Tori, 9 months ago, you walked into my life and refused to leave even when I gave you every reason to run. You fought for me, for Sophie, for the possibility that broken people could heal together. I promised to love you fiercely, to be your partner, not your project, to build a life with you that honors where we've been while looking toward where we're going. Tori's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Garrett, you reminded me that authenticity matters more than appearance. That real strength comes from vulnerability, not control. You and Sophie gave me a family I didn't know I was missing. I promise to love you both completely, to show up even when it's hard, to choose us over everything else. Always. The judge pronounced them married. Garrett kissed his wife while Sophie cheered and threw purple petals in celebration. The guests applauded. Somewhere in the back, Catherine Sterling cried openly for the first time in decades. The reception unfolded on the same lawn tables arranged under string lights that would glow when sunset arrived. Wyatt's toast was everything Garrett had feared: stories from the construction site, jokes about emotional constipation, genuine emotion about watching a brother learn to live again. Then Catherine stood. The crowd went quiet, uncertain. I wasn't going to speak today. My daughter and I have had a complicated relationship. I've spent years trying to mold her into someone acceptable, someone who fit my expectations of what a Sterling should be. Catherine's voice broke slightly. But watching her with Garrett and Sophie, I finally understand. She doesn't need to fit expectations. She needs to be happy. And Garrett, you've given her that. Thank you for loving my daughter enough to see who she actually is. She sat down. Tori crossed the distance between them and pulled her mother into a hug that felt like forgiveness. Later, when the sun had set and the lights were glowing and Sophie was asleep on Kate Nash's shoulder, Garrett and Tori stood together looking at the family they'd built from impossible circumstances. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you just walked past me that day, if you decided Preston wasn't worth the trouble? Garrett pulled her closer. Every day. And then I remember something Rachel wrote in her letter, that we don't honor the dead by refusing to live. We honor them by choosing life even when it's terrifying. Your wife was wise. She was, and she'd like you. You think, I know, she had a thing for stubborn women who didn't know when to quit. They danced under string lights while their wedding guests slowly departed. Sophie woke up long enough to demand one more dance with both of them standing on Garrett's feet while Tori held them both steady. This was living. Not the controlled routine Garrett had built from grief, not the empire Tori had constructed from anger, but something messier and richer and infinitely more valuable. 3 years later, Garrett pushed the stroller through downtown Denver, twins fussing in that particular way that meant they were tired but refusing to admit it. Jack and Rachel, named for his lost friend from the Rangers and for the wife who'd given him permission to love again, were 2 years old and convinced that sleep was a conspiracy invented by exhausted parents. Sophie walked beside him, now 7, and carrying herself with the confidence of a kid who knew she was loved. She chattered about school and her art class and whether butterflies could survive winter if you kept them warm enough. Daddy, where are we going? Riverside Café, anniversary tradition. And Tori met them there, arriving directly from a board meeting, but having changed into jeans and a sweater. She'd stepped back from day-to-day CEO operations 2 years ago, now serving as board chair, while her COO handled the grinding hours. It gave her time for twins and Sophie's events and the life they'd built that mattered more than quarterly earnings. They claimed their table, the one where everything began. Different now with kids and chaos instead of careful distance. Better. 3 years. Can you believe it? Garrett looked at his wife across a table scattered with coloring books and Sophie's latest art project. At the twins finally surrendering to sleep in their stroller. At the life they'd fought for when it would have been easier to walk away. Some days, yes. Some days it feels like yesterday that I threw your business card in the trash. You're never going to let me forget that, are you? Never. Sophie tugged on Tori's sleeve. Tell me the story again, about how Daddy saved you. Tori pulled Sophie into her lap. Your daddy saw someone being mean to me. He stepped in without knowing who I was or what he'd get for helping. He was just good, and that goodness changed everything. Like in fairy tales. Better than fairy tales because this is real. Later, walking home through Denver streets with Sophie between them and the twins asleep in the stroller, Garrett thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. Convinced he'd used up his lifetime allotment of happiness, building walls around grief and calling it strength. That man wouldn't recognize his life now, wouldn't believe that broken people could heal together, that second chances existed, that love didn't diminish by being shared, it multiplied. His phone buzzed. Text from Wyatt, good job, not screwing it up, kid. Garrett smiled and typed back one-handed. Still terrified, I'll wake up and this will be a dream. Then stop sleeping. Stay awake and appreciate what you have. At home, they divided responsibilities with practiced efficiency. Garrett handled twin bedtime while Tori helped Sophie with homework. Then they collapsed on the couch with wine and the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. I've been thinking about something Rachel wrote in that letter. Which part? The part about how loving someone new doesn't replace what came before. It continues it. Garrett set down his wine. I used to think I only had room for one love, that letting you in meant pushing Rachel out. But it's not like that at all. No, she made me capable of this, of trusting, of believing I deserved happiness. Without her, I wouldn't have been able to let you in. So in a weird way, you're both part of the same story. Tori shifted closer, tucking herself against his side. I spent 20 years thinking love was weakness, that needing anyone was failure. Then you happened, and I realized needing someone isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we do. When did we get so philosophical? When we stopped being afraid. They sat there as evening deepened into night, the house quiet except for the usual sounds of family life. Somewhere upstairs, Sophie was definitely not sleeping, probably reading by flashlight. The twins would wake in 3 hours demanding bottles. Tomorrow would bring chaos and exhaustion and the beautiful mess of actually living. It was everything Garrett hadn't known he needed. His phone buzzed one more time. Wyatt again. By the way, that Riverside project you finished just won a state architecture award. Boss wants you to run the next 3 major builds. Thought you should know you're kind of crushing it. Garrett showed Tori the message. She grinned. So the construction worker who thought he was just surviving is actually thriving. Apparently, though I blame you for that. Good, that was the plan all along. Crash into your life and it make you succeed despite yourself. They stayed on the couch until the twins' cry came through the monitor. Garrett stood, pulling Tori up with him. My turn. You did last night. We could do it together. Yeah, we could. They climbed the stairs hand in hand, moving toward the sound of their children needing them, and Garrett realized this was the life Rachel had demanded he build. Not perfect, not without struggle, but real and messy and worth every risk. The best men weren't those who never fell. They were the ones who stood back up and kept protecting what they loved.